The summer of 1946 witnessed something that would shake the very foundations of post-war justice in Poland. As the sun rose over Gdansk on America's Independence Day, thousands upon thousands of people gathered at Biskupia Gorka Hill, their faces etched with pain, anger, and an overwhelming thirst for retribution. They had not come to celebrate freedom in the traditional sense. They had come to watch 5 women die. These were no ordinary women. They were the architects of unspeakable horror, the enforcers of a machinery so cruel that even trained soldiers who liberated the camp struggled to comprehend what they witnessed. Jenny Wanda Bargman, Elizabeth Becker, Wanda Klaff, Ewa Paredes, and Gerda Steinhoff had served as guards at Stutthof concentration camp, a place where humanity itself seemed to have been abandoned at the gates. Among them, Bartman had earned a chilling nickname that would haunt history books forever. They called her the Beautiful Spectre, a contradiction that somehow made her crimes even more disturbing. How could someone who appeared so ordinary on the outside harbor such darkness within? The camp they had supervised was a hell on earth that defied imagination. Stutthof was not just a place of confinement, but a factory of death where approximately 65,000 souls perished through starvation, disease, systematic murder, and sheer cruelty. The guards decided who lived and who died with the casual indifference of someone choosing fruit at a market. Those deemed too weak or too sick to provide labor were simply eliminated, sent to the small gas chamber that operated with terrifying efficiency. The women on trial had personally selected victims for this fate, pointing their fingers at trembling prisoners who would never see another sunrise. When the final months of the war arrived and the Nazi apparatus began crumbling, the evacuations from Stutthof became death marches of their own. Thousands were forced to walk into the freezing Baltic Sea, where machine guns waited to cut them down in the water. Others were executed along roadsides as guards tried desperately to hide evidence of their atrocities. By the time liberation finally came, only about 100 prisoners remained, hidden survivors who had somehow clung to life. These witnesses would tell stories that made even hardened investigators weep. The trial that followed laid bare every horrific detail. The courtroom became a theater of testimony where survivor after survivor recounted beatings with whips and clubs, starvation rations given with mocking laughter, selections made with cruel deliberation, and violence inflicted for entertainment. The 5 women sat through it all, their fates already sealed by the mountain of evidence against them. The court had no choice but to impose the ultimate penalty. Yet the manner of the penalty would prove controversial even decades later. Polish authorities made a deliberate choice that day, one that reflected the raw emotions and desperate needs of a traumatized society. They constructed massive gallows on the hill, structures so large and elevated that every single person in the crowd of more than 20,000 could witness what was about to unfold. This was not going to be a quiet, dignified affair behind prison walls. This was going to be spectacle, message, and catharsis all rolled into one terrible moment. Each woman was brought forward individually, placed on the back of a truck that had been positioned beneath the towering gallows. Officials read their sentences aloud, reminding the assembled masses of precisely what crimes these guards had committed. The executioner himself had been a prisoner at Stutthof, a survivor now tasked with delivering justice to his former tormentors. In one particularly symbolic moment, a female former prisoner helped secure the noose around the neck of one of the condemned guards, a reversal of power so complete it seemed almost theatrical. The method chosen was deliberately slow and agonizing, rather than the quick drop designed to snap the neck and bring instant death. These executions employed gradual strangulation. The truck would slowly drive forward, leaving each woman suspended by the rope around her neck, struggling and kicking for minutes that must have felt like eternities. The crowd watched every second of it, some crying out in grief for lost loved ones, others in grim satisfaction at seeing justice finally served. Understanding why this happened requires diving into the psychology of occupied Poland in those chaotic post-war months. The Polish people had endured years of secret arrests that came in the night, mass deportations that tore families apart, extrajudicial killings that needed no trial or evidence, and a complete breakdown of any semblance of law or order. The Nazi occupation had operated on the principle that might made right, that the strong could do whatever they wished to the weak without consequence. For justice to truly return, it could not happen in shadows or behind closed doors. It had to be visible, undeniable, and immediate. The public execution served as proof that the nightmare was truly over, that the criminals who had wielded absolute power were now powerless themselves. During the war, the Nazis had forced civilians to witness public hangings as demonstrations of their authority. Now that same tool was being used in reverse, showing that the oppressed had become the empowered and that accountability had returned. There was also a practical element to consider. Poland in 1945 and 1946 was not a stable, peaceful nation. Armed civilians roamed the streets, having acquired weapons from various armies that had swept through the territory. The government lived in genuine fear that vigilante justice would erupt, that collaborators and suspected war criminals would be lynched by mobs seeking revenge, without any legal process whatsoever. By staging these public executions, authorities channeled the burning desire for retribution into state-controlled proceedings. The message was clear: justice would be served, but it would be served through courts and proper legal channels, not through mob violence in the streets. The gender of the condemned added another layer of complexity to the entire affair. Post-war society, and even the Allied forces who liberated the camps, struggled with the reality of female perpetrators. The expectation had been that women would be victims, passive sufferers of male aggression, finding women who had beaten prisoners with their own hands, who had laughed at the starving and dying, who had participated enthusiastically in selections for the gas chambers, shattered comfortable assumptions about gender and morality. The public nature of their hangings sent an unmistakable message. That responsibility knew no gender boundaries. That being a woman provided no shield against accountability for monstrous actions. Hanging itself carried symbolic weight as the chosen method. It was the standard legal civilian execution in Poland, deliberately marking these women as common criminals rather than soldiers or prisoners of war. They would not face a firing squad as military personnel might. They would hang as murderers and torturers, their deaths categorized alongside those of peacetime criminals who had violated society's most fundamental laws. The location mattered tremendously as well. These executions took place near the actual camp where the crimes had occurred, in communities where many of the guards had lived their ordinary lives. Local people had known these women, had perhaps even socialized with them, completely unaware of what they did behind the camp fences. The proximity forced everyone to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil does not always announce itself with obvious signs, that it can live next door and smile politely while committing atrocities. After the ropes did their work and the struggling finally stopped, the bodies were cut down. According to reports, they were handed over to medical science, a final utilitarian end to lives that had been devoted to destruction. The crowd dispersed slowly, some feeling that justice had been served, others carrying away new nightmares to add to their collection of wartime horrors. Looking back from our modern perspective, such public executions seem barbaric, a form of brutal justice that civilized societies have moved beyond. Yet in that moment, in that place, for those people who had survived the unsurvivable, it represented something profoundly important. It was acknowledgement of their suffering, validation that what had been done to them mattered, and concrete proof that the world had changed. The story of these 5 women and their public deaths reminds us that history is never simple, that justice in extraordinary times requires extraordinary measures, and that the victims of genocide deserve to see their tormentors face consequences. Their executions closed one chapter in Poland's nightmare, while opening difficult questions about punishment, gender, responsibility, And what societies owe to those who have suffered the worst that humanity can inflict? These questions remain relevant today, challenging us to think deeply about justice, accountability, and how we honor the memory of those who endured unimaginable evil. What do we owe to survivors? How do we ensure that never again truly means never again? The answers matter now more than ever.